The New Democrat Party has a new leader, a populist lefty named Avi Lewis. Mark Carney looks like he's about to get a majority. That's pretty much for sure. So what does all of this mean for the future of Canadian politics? Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name is Brian Lilly, your host. And today, something different, a standard political panel, but with anything but standard guests. Jenni Byrne is the former campaign manager of the Conservative Party of Canada and owner of Jenni Byrne and Associates. Kim Wright is a longtime NDP strategist and the owner of Wright Strategies. And Warren Kinsella, longtime Liberal, was out of the fold for a while, appears to be back in now, runner of many war rooms. Runner of many war rooms and the man behind the Daisy Group. So what do we make of the new NDP leader? Let's do a quick around the table with that. And of course, we'll start with you, Kim. You were in Winnipeg for the convention. What do you make of Avi Lewis?
Well, Winnipeg is always fantastic, especially in March. Look, Avi Lewis, he got a lot of votes, something like 78% of the vote. It was nearly 80,000 New Democrats voted in online or in person. We had 2,000 members at the convention. So thoughts that the NDP is dead and buried are greatly exaggerated. So good news from that perspective. I think that there's always these moments in politics where parties seem to die on the electoral vine and then come back. We saw that in the Conservative Party when, after Kim Campbell and it was just Jean Charest and Elsie Wayne and came back. The New Democrats have done that as well. So I think we're still early days on what does an Avi Lewis leadership actually look like, because campaigning is different than when you get the job. But I would also like to say my condolences to the Lewis family over the death of the giant and legendary Stephen Lewis. That is not only a loss for the Lewis family, but frankly, humanity in general.
Absolutely, condolences to the family for that. The question of Avi Lewis, though, Jenni, your party is now facing off against someone who, unlike the Liberals, does see the affordability issue as something that we need a solution to. The Liberals don't seem to be interested in that issue all that much. So you've got competition for the Conservatives now. Very different answers than what Pierre, Poilievre and the Conservatives will put forward. But in talking about a government-run grocery store and government-run cell phone company and internet company and government banking through Canada Post, economically illiterate as far as I'm concerned, but populist and might work. What are your thoughts?
I guess we'll see. The jury is out on that. I think that it is, economic lunacy as well. I think that Canadians are going to see through most of these policies, and as they're announced, are going to be shredded, not just by other political parties, but of members of the media and economists across the board in terms of how these don't work. We're seeing kind of a trial balloons in Toronto with Olivia Chow announcing a government run grocery store pilot, as well as the mayor of the mayor of New York City, who has other issues that we don't need to belabor. So I think the jury is out in terms of that. What I found in watching this is a party that definitely has picked a lane. This is not the party that I recall when I first got involved in politics, where the backbone were were very much members of the union. There didn't appear to be a lot of reach out to what you would call the blue collar unions and trying to win those votes back, which we've seen kind of bleed over the last 10 years. And so I think that's going to be also an interesting. The NDP have definitely seemingly picked a lane, and it's not going back to the days of Ed Broadbent and Jack Layton.
Warren, your thoughts on Avi Lewis? I know you used to go on his TV show many years ago on CBC.
Yeah, it's hard to believe CBC actually tolerated debate at one point, but they did. So he had a show called Counterspin a million years ago, and I was somebody that they would call to go on the show. And I knew he was a New Democrat and all that stuff. All of us did, but he was likable, and very engaging guy, very media savvy. And he wasn't doctrinaire and he didn't overtalk us, and he was a good guy. He was likable. And so I've been a little bit surprised, further to Jenny's point, what is he doing? Like some of the things he's said during the leadership race are crazy, and some of the things he said about Judaism and Zionism are awful. And I was watching him and I'm like, has he changed or like what's going on? And then I thought, well, maybe he's doing what Richard Nixon used to say in a different context, which is, to get the nomination, you run as far to the extreme as possible. And then as soon as you get it, you start running back. And because, all of us have been involved in leadership races. And sometimes you got to get your candidate to say something that's a little bit wackadoodle in order to get some ink. So maybe that's what he was up to. But, whether his party is nutty or not, we also all know that, people vote according to party affiliation and leader. And this leader has been handed a gift by Mark Carney. Carney has shamelessly stolen planks and ideas from Poilievre's Tories, and he's gotten away with it to a large extent. But that's created a lot of real estate.
Pierre does keep telling him, please steal my ideas.
Yeah, so that creates a lot of real estate, though, just in terms of the so-called ideological spectrum. It creates real estate for the NDP to grow in and, get out of this rump situation that they're in. So I know him and I like him, and he's a likable guy. I think he's better at media than I think people realize because he grew up in this political media family.
I think he'll be very good with the media. Kim, a few things said there I'd like to get your response to. The policies, I don't think something like the government-run grocery store is something that he just threw out there. It seems to be having a moment on the political left right now. New York, Toronto, and now the federal NDP. It's the type of thing that I think a lot of voters would say, well, it'll lower my bill, so I'm behind it. Whether it'll work or not, that's another matter. So what are your thoughts on that? And something that Jenny alluded to, the issue of the fight for blue-collar workers. The Conservatives have made a lot of inroads in places like Hamilton, Timmins, Windsor. They followed, to a degree, Doug Ford's playbook that he ran provincially. He did the same thing. Is the NDP just giving up on blue-collar voters?
No, not at all. And, there's a couple of parts to that I want to unpack a little bit. The joke is that, Canada is 5 telcos, 3 grocery stores, and a trench coat, right? So maybe we do need to shake things up a little bit. We'll see if this works. But at some point, you have to try new ideas instead of just complaining about them all the time. So let's give this a thought. I think there's a lot of details to be worked out, as we all know, of how this might work. But, let's see what that looks like, because Canadians are, pardon the pun, starving for a new way in which we get access to groceries and how farmers can sell product directly to Canadians. So there is something to explore here. One of the things that, wherever you sit on the political spectrum, people like authenticity. And what they feel like they get from Doug Ford and Mark Carney, and now of Avi Lewis, is authentic. You may not like his policies, but you're like, you know what? I respect that you authentically are showing up and showing how you believe. It is the criticism of what we've seen on Pierre Poilievre for years, right? Especially with blue collar workers. He'll go out and buy a pair of work boots, forget to take the price tag off the darn things. Well, he's like, I'm out there with the people and their festivals, which was the most absurd quote I've ever heard from a Canadian politician in my life, but there we are. But people are looking for that authenticity, and I think when they start to see that, and they saw it with Jack Layton, and they saw it with Ed Broadbent, and they saw it with Stephen Lewis, they're looking for that. And so I don't know how he'll play up in Northern Ontario, but I know that the morning after He was elected leader. He had breakfast with the head of the Canadian Labour Congress. There have been lots of conversations with Labour leaders, and trying to unite those various access points. And more importantly, it's how do you talk to people not just in their leadership, but on the ground and showing up when it matters, not just when it's convenient.
So one of the things I would say to that though, Kim, is people are looking for something, and blue collar workers, which voted more for the Conservative Party in the last election than what they did for the NDP. What they're looking for is stability, just like every other Canadian. And there are close to 1 million unionized workers in the different resource sectors in Northern Ontario, in the mines, in the oil sands, and these are not just for the core industries, but also for the industries that support them. There's a reason that Wab Kinew has a much different opinion than Avi Lewis, and you have two NDP premiers that have come out against his policies regarding that. So I think that there can be a lot of quote, showing up when it matters. But what these workers are looking for, what these voters are looking for, is prosperity and paying their bills and enjoying life. And right now, the policies that Avi Lewis and in the past several years that the NDP has espoused is essentially putting these sectors out of work, putting these blue collar workers out of jobs.
Well, let's talk about infighting, though, within the party. So immediately after Avi Lewis is elected, Naheed Nenshi comes out and distances himself. And then Carla Beck, so Naheed Nenshi, obviously the leader of the Alberta NDP, Carla Beck, leader of Saskatchewan NDP, says, you got issues. Well, we fundamentally disagree. Jenni, you went through an election campaign where there were factions within the Conservative movement fighting. It doesn't help, does it?
No, internal battles never help.
So,
No, I mean, look, there's going to be moments in everybody's political family where they don't get along, right? Brian, you rightly point out, right? Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre are not besties. They're not, going shopping together. But these are part of the discourse. And what good leaders
those were two pretty harsh statements, though, from Beck and Nenshi.
And what good leaders figure out how to do, and we'll see what Avi decides to do with it, but what good leaders try to do is find where there are common grounds and where there's not. And he did that with Wab Kinew on the weekend. We'll see what happens with the rest of him. And he's also, I understand, has reached out to all of the leadership candidates and trying to figure out ways in which they can all come together. Families will always disagree, but it's how you show up for each other when it matters.
Warren, do you think left-wing populism can work in a Canadian federal election?
Yeah, for sure it can. And, Mondami's win, which was a significant, he had some formidable forces tilting against him, and he won big. And, notwithstanding his views on Israel and everything else, he won the city that's got the biggest expat Jewish population in the world outside of Israel. So yes, I think that, what is the era we're in? We're all in the Trump era. We may not live in the United States, but all of us deal with Trump in different ways. He's going to be on TV tonight. Don't have a clue what he's going to say. Is he going to end NATO? Is he going to end the war? Is he going to talk about Sharpies? What's he going to do? And so that has a consequence on every politician, Mr. Poilievre, Mr. Carney, Mr. Lewis. But I think, I look at politics as a pendulum. Everything's a reaction, right? And if you go too far to the right, as I think things have with Trump, then you get a Mondani. And the same thing in Canada. If Carney is seen as repudiating traditional liberal positions on stuff like a carbon tax or capital gains, all the things that he's walked back, at some point people are going to go, I don't like this. And on the grocery store thing and all that, I know, if you're at the Fraser Institute, of course, you're going to make fun of stuff like that. But right now, people are hurting, as Poilievre himself said repeatedly during the campaign, and they are. And I don't think they give a shit if if they got to go buy bananas at a government-owned grocery store and they get a better deal, they're going to do it. So people are much more, much less preoccupied with ideology and ideological purity than perhaps, the rest of us are. And so I think we're in this weird time where weird things can happen, where the NDP can indeed come back and take advantage of, some of the moves that Poilievre and Carney have made.
I would argue we've got three populist leaders for heading up all the parties. They all have a bit of populism within them. Poilievre, Carney, and now Lewis. We'll see. Let's turn to Carney, who's about to get a majority. And I'll ask this question because it's not really an argument, will he get a majority or won't? He's going to win at least two by-elections. I think he's going to win all three. Fred Delory had a great piece out a little while ago explaining how the Liberals can spend $330,000 in Terrebonne, the Montreal riding, 3 times as much as the Bloc Québécois because of the way the rules are written. And that gives them a huge advantage. So what do you do after that? We'll start with Warren. Would you prorogue? Because as I wrote in my column for the Toronto Sun, I'd prorogue. Take control of the committees.
100%. 100%, because I think most people don't even know how to spell the word, but it is an important word in these circumstances because, in a minority parliament, minority legislature, you don't have control of committees in the way that you need to. I mean, look what happened to their budget bill. It had to ping around the system for weeks and weeks and weeks because they didn't have the control they would otherwise have in a majority parliament. So I think it'll be pretty consequential for them. Will it be of significance for Canadians? I'm more skeptical about that. I'm more cynical about that. My sense, I don't know if I agree that Carney's a populist. I think he's an incrementalist. I think he regards his mandate letter is just offsetting damage from Trump. So he's the janitor doing cleanup in aisle 3. That's what he does. But I actually don't know what Mark Carney believes in. And again, for a guy like Poilievre or a guy like Lewis, that spells opportunity. Because I know where Poilievre is. I know what he thinks, or I think I do. And I know where Lewis is at, or I think I do. But Carney is this chameleon. And, it's obviously worked for him in the past year. But maybe not so much in the next year or two.
I've got a almost 500-page book on my desk here called Values that it was supposed to tell us what he thought, but as is always the case with Liberals, Warren, if you don't like their values or their principles, hang on 5 minutes. They've got others.
Were you able to get through the whole thing, Brian?
Oh, no.
Yeah,
It's a cure for insomnia.
Truly, the amount of people who chat GPT'd what should I know about this book is probably pretty remarkable.
I started it several times. That's
Yeah, I dive in now and again. I read parts and then I stop. But on the prorogation, a lot of people think, well, that means that you got to shut down the House for months. I guess the way that Trudeau did when he resigned, or Stephen Harper in the 2008 crisis. But Louis Saint Laurent, Lester Pearson, and Pierre Trudeau all prorogued the House of Commons and started a new session the very same day. Several of them, including Trudeau, did it at least twice, I believe. The next day, Brian Mulroney did it the next day. That's how I would do it, Jenni. Would you prorogue if you were Mark Carney or in the position we all expect him to be in on April 14th?
Yeah, well, and just from a practical point of view, it won't be April 14th because, of course, the by-election, the writ of return the returns have to come back through Elections Canada. So we're probably looking closer to May. It's 10 to 14 days normally, so we're probably looking closer to May 1st. But yeah, I agree with Warren's point. If I were them, I would want it cleaner and try to get through committee. I'm not sure there's much horse trading, though. The Conservatives obviously aren't going to horse trade, and I don't think the Bloc will. The Bloc will either. So I think that Carney will prorogue. He may be putting that out there, just basically saying, I want to. I don't want to prorogue. I don't want to start over again. But of course, the Bloc and the Conservatives are not playing ball, are not working with us. But I don't think that I believe he's going to prorogue. He's going to have a majority. Like there is no thinking in what I think, and Warren and Kim can speak for themselves, in a universe where he is not going to take advantage of having a majority on committees. It's just the mammoth power that gives to government, having been on both sides, a minority and a majority government in terms of overseeing committees. It's too great of a prize, a treasure, for him not to do it.
And Kim, what about you? If you were in Mark Carney's shoes, what would you do?
Um, so yeah, he will likely prorogue, clear the decks, get this done. I mean, he's done a nice combination of political red rover, as well as some by-elections, but it isn't a super duper majority, right? Like, as I call it in Ontario, right? Where you can really just do anything and some people can miss a day or here or what have you.
And you can fire your MPPs.
You still have to manage caucus, and as we all know on this podcast, caucus has no control until they choose to have control, and there is a moment that every caucus chooses to seize control of the leader and the prime minister. Right now, Mark Carney is doing popular things. I don't know about populist things, but there is certainly some popular things he's doing. Him and Doug Ford and Olivia Chow made a really huge announcement on infrastructure and cutting of development charges. This is a thing for years that homeowners, it is actually one of the things that costs a lot, especially if you're in a city. The infrastructure costs of transit are massive. And made it so that transit can be built in Toronto. So finally, after 20 years of talking about a waterfront east LRT, they have found a way to Mayor Chow and Premier Ford and Mark Carney have figured out a way to get this finally built. This is going to be massive. So it isn't just about tinkering around the edges. What people are looking for is, are we finally going to get those projects done that people have talked about for years? I think there is a lot of deals to be had always with Mark Carney. And certainly Mayor Chow has taken advantage of that where she can. But I think Mark Carney's got to figure out what kind of prime minister he wants to be past the first 2 years.
What does him getting a majority change, Kim?
I think it's psychological.
In terms of how Canadian politics works for the next while, I don't see us having an election until 2029. What does that change for your party?
So I think it gives the new leader, it gives Avi Lewis the time to build up those EDAs, build up those riding associations, find those candidates, raise some money, because it's no secret that there's a little shortage of change in the NDP coffers at the moment. So getting an opportunity to build up that credibility with Canadians as well as credibility in our coffers is really going to be helpful. From a practical perspective, I'm not sure that Canadians will see a significant change in how Mr. Carney governs. I think it is a bit of vibes, especially for those who are around Ottawa and who cover Ottawa, about calling it a majority government. As I said earlier, he still will have to manage the business of the House. He will still have to manage who shows up to vote and who doesn't show up to vote, and who's whispering the corridors and how deals might be done on the sidelines. So I think that this will give him a proverbial spring in his step, but practically speaking, we're not going to the polls anytime soon.
Jenni, I've heard some conservatives say that for Pierre Poilievre and the leadership around him, that Carney getting a majority might be a bit of a blessing. Just had a senior conservative saying that to me the other day. What do you think of it?
Well, I think I agree with Kim. I don't think that there's an election anytime coming. So I think time is definitely on the side of for Pierre and for the Conservatives. I think that right now the Canadian economy is somewhat teetering, walking a tightrope, so to speak. And so there's a lot of expectations in terms of Carney and his ability to negotiate with Donald Trump and start to make changes on affordability, which I agree. You said earlier that seems to be very low down on this government's priority. I think, though, there will proven to be frustration among the opposition. Majority committees, when the government has the majority, there is very little wiggle room. Right now, the opposition can band together and set the agenda. They can call witnesses. They can bring forward witnesses that are very unhelpful to the government. Once that you have a majority in committee, then it's all driven solely by the government. They can shut things down. They control everything. And also, just from a practical point of view, it means that Conservatives will lose spots on the committee. And of course, they are plum positions. MPs all have the committees that they like to sit on, and with a majority, that takes away kind of a spoil, so to speak, that the leader has in terms of caucus management.
And a little bit of extra money from those positions never
Well, the
hurts
vice
anyone.
chair they would still keep. So but just the committee membership isn't extra money, but people like the committee member, like, there's a very large contingent of Western Caucus members. The Ag Committee is one of the most asked and sought for committee within our party, for example. And so there's going to be one less person that's going to be able to sit on that committee. So that's from a practical point of view that will be a caucus management issue.
Warren, what does it change? Just vibes or more?
I don't know. I mean, for weirdos like us, it's a big deal. I mean, to me, a majority, it's like, well, so what? What do you do with it? What are you going to do? And again, I think all of us have been watching Carney over the past year. It's a year this month. And he doesn't have a trade deal with Trump. He doesn't have any certainty on, multiple economic fronts. We live in a more uncertain world than we had, I think, even a year ago. So, I think there's a bit of a boomerang out there for Carney that might be heading his way, where people's expectations are, well, look, you're this boring, bland banker that we elected to give us some certainty in our lives at a time when there's not much. And you haven't delivered. And so I don't, for sure, he is a very popular prime minister at the moment. He's going to have a majority. I think The Economist just reported that it's the first prime minister in Canadian history, I don't know if they're right, who's going to achieve a majority through by-elections. That's never happened before, according to The Economist. But he's on the bubble, and what the people giveth, the people can take it away. So he's got to do something with it. It's not enough just to have a majority. You got to give people some security, and people are anxious. They're afraid, all of us hear it all the time. We hear about businesses we know and have gone under, or people who have moved away or have had to sell their house because they can't afford it anymore. That stuff's really happening in the real world, and they want to hear from politicians about it, and they're prepared to do weird things if the politician doesn't listen, like Mandami. Mandami's an example of what happens when people are angry with the choices that are available to them. So, I think there's a risk there to Poilievre, there's a risk there to Lewis, but the principal risk is to Carney, because he's the one who's prime minister.
Okay, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll ask about polling, the latest numbers from Leger. More in moments.
Think Verizon is expensive? Think again. Anyone can bring their AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store today, and we'll give you a better deal. So bring us your bill. Walk in, run in, pogo stick in, teleport if you can. Ride on the back of a rollerblading yak, or fly in on the wings of a majestic falcon. Any way you can, bring your AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store today, and we'll give you a better deal on the best network. Based on Root Metrics Best Overall Mobile Network Performance, U.S. Second Half 2025. All rights reserved. Must provide very recent postpaid consumer mobile bill in the name of the person redeeming the deal. Additional terms, conditions, and restrictions apply.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Tap the banner or visit usaa.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice. that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of the emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Post-media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026 anywhere you get your podcasts.
Latest numbers from Léger aren't good for either the NDP or the Conservatives. They're okay, I guess, for the Bloc Québécois. But right now, nationally, they've got the Mark Carney's Liberal Party at 48%, Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party at 34%, and in a poll taken before Avi Lewis was elected leader, Don Davies, New Democrats, at 6%. I was going over this with one of our editors. This is the Léger poll for Post Media, and the editor said, well, who is Mark Carney's voting base right now? And I said, based on this, everyone, because he's leading among men. He's leading among women. He is leading among 18 to 34-year-olds. He's not leading among 35 to 54. That's Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, 41 to 38. Big lead among voters 55 plus. Leading among urban, leading among suburban, and very close on rural, almost tied with the Conservatives. So how do the other two parties represented here, not by Warren Kinsella, how do the Conservatives and the NDP shift those numbers? And I say that, Warren knows my saying very well. Voters are fickle, polls can change, campaigns matter. But how do you do that right now when it seems that all that has to happen for Mark Carney is for Donald Trump to say something about us or start a war or, irritate Canadian voters somehow, and Mark Carney's polling numbers go up? How do you fix that, Jenni?
Well, I think that it's what we talked about earlier on the podcast, Brian, is that the number one issue for Canadians across all polls that we're seeing publicly is affordability. It's grocery prices, it's housing, it's inflation. And so this has been a issue that Mark Carney is seemingly uncomfortable with. I watch Question Period almost daily, like some of us, I'm sure a lot of us do when they can. And it's the issue that he is most uncomfortable being asked in the House when he is challenged on this. And so the number one issue among Canadians is that is affordability, and that is an issue that the Conservatives lead on. That is that have led on, and that is an issue that they continue to talk about. So I think that it's extremely smart for Pierre and for the Conservative team to continue pushing those issues. It's Mark Carney was the one that said, judge me by the cost of groceries around last year at this time, and so those I think that though that is that is what the Conservative focus should be, is the issue set as it is now, because I don't see it, unfortunately, for Canadians getting any better.
And now you got a bit of competition from Kim and the NDP there, though. You're going to be able to hold on to that issue?
Well, I think we'll see. As I said, this has been the driving issue for Pierre's leadership. Right back from way before his leadership, he was the first person that was talking about inflation and all of the chattering class and a lot of the media types. I'm not saying all of them, Brian. Some of the media types were saying it was ridiculous. It's going to be stagflation, not inflation. And so this is something that he has been driving. He has been driving, and frankly, if Avi Lewis and the NDP stay on the populist track on the other side, then they're probably going to look at appeal to voters that potentially could be different. So where Mark Carney is now is he has the potential of being middled on both sides of the political spectrum.
Kim, I remember Jack Layton's team coming into our offices on the Hill 2011 before the election. It was a couple months before, and they did their dog and pony show, and they said, here's why you folks, this is in the TV network days, here's why you folks at Sun News Network should make sure you cover us. And they detailed how they were going to do what Jenni just described, slicing away. Said the Conservatives are going to eat at the Liberals from the left. We're going to eat at the Conservatives from the right. We're going to slice away at the Liberals from the left. And they did. Is that part of what they have to do to get those polling numbers up? Do you think Avi gets a bump just for being a new leader? How do they turn it around and get it back up to 15 to 20% at least?
And keeping in mind that, the way our polling, the voter efficiency, and I know there are always people who roll their eyes when they say that, but, there's a reason that Marit Stiles is the leader of the official opposition and Bonnie Crombie's out of a job, right? Like, that does actually matter in a lot of places, the way the NDP numbers shake out. But this will also come down to the leader and his authenticity, their ability to create movements and moments, and how do you make sure you're capitalizing on training those volunteers, getting those things and getting those voters to come out and put their votes into the ballot box. The logistics of old school campaigning and an ability to pivot depending upon what's happening in the world. One of the things I think most Conservatives I talk to continue to shake their head at is that Pierre Poilievre never has really changed his message. I mean, if you give him the opportunity, he's still talking about axe and the tax and, the variations of verbing the noun.
Well, the industrial carbon tax did just go up again.
Right. But the way in which he's still fighting, the former prime minister and not the current prime minister, it kind of starts to wear thin. So what I expect to see from Avi Lewis and his team as they take leadership of the party is how do you do those grassroots organizing and also telling the story of why what the NDP did, in particular around dental care, has mattered to thousands and thousands of Canadians. It has transformed people's lives. And maybe that's not the case for everybody who maybe has a great insurance program, but most Canadians don't. And it has mattered immensely to people's lives. So the practical, as well as the organizing, as well as the authenticity. And that's kind of how you start to slice it. And having a plan and having a program and how you talk to all Canadians, not just a micro subset.
Jagmeet Singh could not sell all the things that he was able to get out of the Trudeau government. So that's why Avi Lewis has the job. We'll see if he's a better salesman. Warren, have you ever worked for a leader, prime minister, premier that's been sitting at 40%, looking towards 50%? And is there a danger in that?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, certainly the danger for liberals always, they're the most lethal element in their DNA is arrogance, right? And
No,
yeah,
liberals aren't
yeah,
arrogant.
and
What?
you start to hang out with yeah, but all of them could be assholes, Brian. Like, come on, I'm
I
sorry. There's
know.
no monopoly on virtue, but for liberals, it's particularly lethal, um, because they're so often susceptible to it. They've been in government more than anybody else at the federal level, and they do feel. You saw this so often during the Trudeau era, where they just felt that they had an entitlement to power, and people got pretty pissed off about that, and we're getting ready to punish them in a big way. So I think that is the danger of having a huge majority. And then also caucus management. You have people, because they all think they should be prime minister, every single one of them. And some of them aren't fit to be a postmaster of a 3-house town, but they all think that they're brilliant, and they're all ambitious. And if they're not getting into cabinet, or you're not managing them properly, then you start to have the leaks, and you start to have the griping and whatnot, and it can be a real problem. So yeah, from lofty heights, the bigger you are, the harder you fall, and that's certainly true in politics.
You mentioned earlier that Carney hasn't really delivered, though, and I would agree. He has clearly not learned one of the key lessons in Canadian politics, which is
Undersell,
undersell and
overperform.
overdeliver, and he's really overselling stuff and then not delivering. But he's at 48%. This is not an outlier poll, and maybe somebody else is off by a bit, but the fact that they have a substantial lead is not in dispute. So what's driving this? Is this all just Trump related? I think it's driving a lot of it, but what do you see as putting him up at 48% when, what have you done for me lately?
It's what he's not. He's not Justin Trudeau, so he benefited from that. He's not Donald Trump, so he's benefited from that. He's not a lunatic ideologue like we saw. We saw it was like the Star Wars bar scene at the Winnipeg convention for the NDP. So he's not any
The
of
band
that.
was great, Warren.
Yeah, no, it's like the island of misfit toys with people don't know how to laugh. That's what that was. So he benefits by not being other people. But again, if I were advising him, and I am not, it's like, well, what do you believe? What makes your heart go pitter patter? What gets you up in the morning? And it can't be just to be against stuff or to not be somebody else. It's like, who is Mark Carney? The cliche is, the riddle, wrapped in an enigma. I know who Poilievre is. I know who Lewis is. I don't know who Mark Carney is. And that's a vulnerability, because at a certain point, people say, well, you're not who I thought you were. You're not what I voted for. You're not doing the stuff you said you'd do. And, that obviously that hasn't happened yet. The pendulum hasn't swung back, but eventually, the pendulum swings back for them all. And sooner or later, you pay a price.
I think right now, him not having to deal with Trump is working for him, and he continues to fight with Trump.
Agree.
And when he does that, it works for him. But if we don't get a deal, then eventually more people start losing their jobs, and folks will be hurting. I just don't know when that kicks in. Jenni, it was a few times authenticity has been mentioned, and Kim's taken some shots at Mr. Poilievre. His appearance on Joe Rogan, I thought he came across as very authentic. I was like, there's the guy I've known 20 years. He was humble in that interview. He was inquisitive. He showed depth of knowledge on several different fronts, including kettlebells. Is that the Pierre that folks need to see to warm up to, or how do you see it? I mean, you've known him 30 years.
Yeah, a long time. You're aging me, Brian. Yeah. Well, what people are seeing is that is Pierre. He is very engaging. He is funny. He's extremely smart. Very well read. and people are seeing that. He's also ruthlessly message driven, and in terms of his discipline on that, all of those things are true. So I think that people are seeing that he is a likable person, and I think that's just one piece of the pie. I think that it's likable, and I believe the issue set is going to is in our favor, is in his favor, because he has predicted a lot of what has happened. Because where we are right now is not because of factions fully in the U.S. or a war in Iran. These are from 10 years, 11 years of liberal government policies. And I think, Brian, where the rubber will hit the road, so to speak, for Carney, you were talking to Warren about this, is, in July is the Kuzma negotiations. That's when they have to be completed. We're hearing, if you believe the media reports, that Mexico is 90% there in terms of their negotiation. There is going to be a number of mortgages that come due for renewal over the course of late summer and early fall, where people's mortgages are going to increase a tremendous amount. We're already seeing it. We're all hearing stories, personal stories of people who are unable to pay their mortgages, and rent is increasing in a number of places. And so I think that is when things will start to change in terms of where this government is. And I'm not sure that the Liberals are prepared fully for that.
I don't know why you say it's 10 years of bad policy. I heard directly from the housing minister that house prices went up because of the war in Iran, and the unemployment numbers went up because of the war in Iran. They seem to try and think that they can get away with things. Kim, is that the type of arrogance that Warren's was referencing that can be trouble for Liberals?
Oh, absolutely. And that is always the danger, right? When the only thing you stand for is winning, that becomes the challenge, and then you'll say anything to keep that. But Canadians voted for a banker in a good suit that's occasionally a bit dorky. But what? There's always a moment where you stop liking your banker. And I'm not sure how Mr.
When the mortgage that Jenni was talking about comes up for renewal.
Usually about that time. So what are Canadians looking for? They are looking for that stability. They are looking for things to be built. They are looking for lack of rhetoric. Look, we see this all the time. An incredibly unpopular leader, in this case, Mr. Trudeau, leaves, and the new guy gets a free ride. For all of Mayor Rob Ford's challenges when he was in office, the only thing John Tory had to do was not do crack, right? Like, there was way too much of a long leash that was given, and a lack of accountability on things actually getting done, to the point that the literal trains went off the TTC tracks in Scarborough, and because of lack of state of good repair funding. So it's analogous potentially for the Carney folks, and in particular some of those ministers who tend to be charitably gaffe prone under the bright lights, and that is going to be the challenge for managing caucus and cabinet and this government for Mr. Carney. And it's going to be one thing when you can say, well, we're going to go to the polls soon, like, guys, keep it together, keep it in line. It's a very different thing when we all will recognize that we are into a government for the next couple of years. And then the danger for that, for Mr. Carney, for Prime Minister Carney, is how do you manage that? How do you manage the gaffe prone?
I'll ask this one last question and do a quick whip around before we wrap. But you mentioned gaffe-prone cabinet ministers. One of the arguments for Carney looking to go to an early election had been that so he could get some of his own people in and recruit. He has a very weak bench. He has Justin Trudeau's team. And, Sir John A.'s old line, if you want me to have a better cabinet, send me better wood. He's got rotting wood. And so you've got someone like Lena Diab in immigration who can't answer basic questions. Who do you replace her with? Is there a real potential for Mark Carney that what gets him in trouble maybe isn't himself? Maybe it's not the arrogance you referred to, Warren. Maybe it's not a lack of delivery, but a cabinet that, this is, He's always described as a very demanding, detailed guy, looks for results, and he's got a cabinet that just filled with underachievers. Is that a problem that's going to get him in trouble, Warren?
Maybe. I mean, the thing is, the law of nature is you only have one prime minister, right? You only have one leader, so you got to protect them. But cabinet ministers come and go, and you can toss them under the bus and they disappear. The characteristic of this new era liberal government, so Carney as well as Trudeau, is I think most people couldn't pick, 5 liberal cabinet ministers out of a police lineup. And, that's very different than how my boss Chrétien was, where we had some big names. We had some big players. I think Carney has got, Pierre, Poilievre has got some big names there. Obviously the NDP situation is a disaster for them in terms of Parliament. I guess where it matters is looking like you can form a government. You look like serious people ready to do serious work. And the problem is, I think the Libs have vested too much of their energy, their power, whatever, their aura in Carney. And if he stumbles, the whole shebang is in trouble. That was the problem with Trudeau, is there was no successor strategy. It was just him. And when he started to crater, they had nowhere to go. So I think that it does matter. And I think that, the next few months are going to be interesting. If Carney can't pull off this deal by July 1st with Trump, I think people are going to start to get cranky.
Jenni, one of the conservative stars, Michelle Rempel-Garner, the notorious MRG, as I call her, she loves going at that immigration minister, and she can be tough on her sometimes, but even asking basic questions, Diab is out of her depths. Do gaffes like that hurt the government, from your point of view, as someone that's been on both sides?
Well, I think they hurt the government, this particular government, especially because it does throw Carney off from his messages when the media, when the stories are coming out that that they have a minister that's not performing well. But at the end of the day, we're not seeing any evidence that matters electorally. I agree with Warren. I think there's a benefit of the doubt right now. It's a benefit of the doubt until there isn't a benefit of the doubt, and it will happen very quickly. If you believe the rumors up here in Ottawa, I'm here in Ottawa. You can tell by the very lovely nondescript hotel room I'm sitting in. You're looking at a shuffle. He would like to do a shuffle in the summer, and I think you'll probably see one of the things that we're seeing from him is that he is a lot more ruthlessly political than what probably people thought that he would be for a bureaucrat / banker. And so I think that unlike politicians in the past, he is going to, and that's from both sides, where he is kind of more, he's going to be less of a shuffling pieces on the chessboard, so to speak, and removing people that are underperformers and promoting people that have from the backbenches that have proven to be better, as well as starting to elect people that he has recruited himself. So as we've seen with these by-elections, except for Terrebonne, which they have the candidate of record, he is obviously taking a hand in who the candidates are in those by-elections.
Kim, is it a rake for him to step on, do you think?
It can be, but there were a lot of people that got elected or even came back to run for Mark Carney, right? Like, he did actually get to choose some of these candidates. Some he was kept with from the previous administration. I think what we've seen has been Prime Minister Carney really trying to get control of his own understanding of not just the bureaucracy of government and the overall machinery of government, but the political side, which he hadn't really been exposed to as much as the governor of the Bank of Canada. There are some people who are in that parliamentary secretary class and some of the other folks that have been kind of working their way, understanding of things that they might not have had because they were rookie members. I look at somebody like a Jennifer McKelvey, who is the Ajax MP, and she was the deputy mayor in Toronto, and quite good. So I suspect as part of the proroguing, whenever that does happen, we'll start to see some of those other moves, taking away some of the more gaffe-prone cabinet ministers and moving others into that role. It's kind of almost time. We've been in Parliament now in this government for around about a year, and so we expect to see that shift happen as well. Will they perform any better under the bright lights of question period? Who knows? But that's always the challenge of every new government. I look to Jenni and Warren. Certainly, you guys have had that experience in the Harper government and the Chrétien government. There were some folks who, oh boy, did they step on some rakes. Some were rakes, and how that also all unfolds. And that's just the normal part of politics. It's part of why it's so dang fun when we watch it.
Exactly. Well, thank you all for your time today. It has been a blast, and we'll chat again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Full Comment is a Post Media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx, theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Make sure that you hit share, put this up on social media, email it to your Aunt May and Whitby. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum, and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Post Media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history, and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026, anywhere you get your podcasts.